We're going to hear from Katie, who's going to talk to us about the marketer's guide to selling content strategy. And I know that that's something that most of us in most of our jobs do at one time or another. So with that, it's all yours.
Thank you, Carmen. I also want to give a quick shout out to Adam, who works here at Cambia and has done such a wonderful job setting up the space the past several times that we've met here, so thank you again. As Carmen mentioned, today we're going to be talking about the marketer's guide to selling content strategy. And I semi-ironically titled the talk this because I feel like it's something that I've heard countless times from members of this group and in different content strategy circles and different content marketing circles, and kind of just across the board, everyone's wondering how you sell content strategy. And depending who you ask, you can't sell it. So I'm going to share my perspective on how you can maybe do that. So a little bit first about who I am. As Carmen said, I'm Katie. Some of you know me as Katie Dell on Twitter, so if there's anything that I say that is extremely enlightening, feel free to tweet it. I also am the organizer of this group. I've been organizing it for about 2.5 years now with a couple wonderful people, Carmen included. I am also the founder of an underground cheese club. It's really hush-hush, so don't let it leave this room. I am also an active participant on Instagram. I love Instagram, and there is a huge group of a couple thousand people called Eigers Portland. Check it out if you're not there yet. I also am the former organizer of something called the Delight Conference, which Carmen did not mention, but she is currently organizing. It's coming up in a few weeks. It is one of the premier user experience conferences in the country for customers that are thinking, or for companies that are thinking about delivering delightful customer experiences. And it is organized by Connective DX, an agency in town. And members of this group get a $100 discount on their registration with the code CSPDX100. We'll send that out after. So I'm a former co-founder of that conference as well. But more importantly than who I am, because you really don't care, you want to know what I know, right? So whether I am organizing an international conference for hundreds of experienced designers, or an underground cheese club for fanatics, or curating images for Instagram, or curating content for this group, I do know one thing. I know that community, whether it is a group of experienced designers, or friends, or teammates, I know that community is the basis for great content. And great content, when it comes together with those people, is what creates great experiences. Oh, by the way, this is the first of many wonderful Venn diagrams you're going to see tonight. I put this in here almost as a joke because my friend Shannon really loves Venn diagrams, so I thought this would make her happy, or cringe inside. So, in a couple of nutshells, this is what I'm about. I look at content strategy through the lens of content marketing. I also have experience developing a content strategy framework for commerce. So I will tell you a bit about what that means and how I ultimately see that those two factors as important experiences in learning how to build the case for content strategy. So first, I wanted to share a quote from Richard Ingram, who is a very, very smart content strategist out in the UK. He is also the organizer of the London Content Strategy Meetup Group. If you happen to find yourself in London, check it out. Richard says that web content strategists are made, not born. And I could not agree more, because I think everyone in this room who calls themselves a content strategist was not born that way, probably. Also, whatever your experience may have been, you probably weren't a content strategist 5 years ago, 10 years ago. You were probably something else and found yourself into this profession. So I also included a shot from Edward Scissorhands because I love that movie, and I was just watching it the other day. And Edward was lovingly crafted with components, and that's how he came to be the adorable person he came to be. So from Richard Ingram's post that I found that quote in, he also shared this fancy Venn diagram, basically, which looks at the different approaches to becoming a content strategist. I primarily started focusing on the editorial side and the web strategy and planning side. So looking at how to align customer goals with our brand goals and develop a content marketing roadmap around that. You can find this, there's the link at the bottom, and I'll send out the slides after, so don't worry about trying to squint too hard. First, a quick throwback. When I started at iSight Design, which is now Connective DX, there were 5 or 6 different agency blogs for one agency. All of these blogs talked about the different areas of expertise and thought leadership coming from 6, maybe 7 people within the agency, business development and sales and marketing sorts. But that's it, from an agency with 40 or 50, maybe 60 people at that time. And I saw a problem with this. When I came in, I was thinking, you know, I'm the marketer now that is supposed to write more content and help share those perspectives, but I'm not the subject matter expert. We need to figure out a way to, A, make this content a little bit more effective, maybe, you know, consolidate some of all of these blogs, and make it a little more useful for the people that are our clients and our prospective clients and our prospective hires. So around this time, maybe a year into my time at iSight, I became aware of a little conference called Confab, which hopefully you all have heard of by now because we're constantly talking about it. It is kind of the big content strategy conference. If you want to know content strategy, that's where you go. It's like the Mecca. And so I went to Confab about a year and a half into my time at iSight to share my perspective as a content strategy newbie. And I think a lot of people kind of cringed because I was the marketing kid, and everyone there was coming from user experience or information design or whatever it was. But I shared my perspective on what it meant to align 6 different blogs. And really, it is content strategy. We did a complete content overhaul. We audited all of the content across these blogs, looked at what the actual goal was of each of them. By the way, this is my slide design back then, so it really hasn't come all that far, so sorry. I see some of you like. Anyways, so I audited all the content. This gave us a really good content inventory and also gave us a good picture of what our content looked like, what our topics were. I also was working very closely with our biz dev and our salespeople to figure out what our goals were and how we could make our content roadmap a little more efficient and aligned with our business goals. So we created a pretty solid plan to consolidate our blogs and make it a little bit more effective for our customers and for our agency. And ultimately came up with this thing we called team content. That's our t-shirt. It was really cool at the time. We printed about 100 of them for an agency of, like I said, 60 or 70 people. So the intent was everyone in the agency is joining team content at some point. So how did that happen? First, another Venn diagram. So this one I think is really interesting because it talks about 2 different components of content strategy. The planning element, which is something that I already talked about. We did the audit, we looked at the user needs, we looked at some of the business personas that we as an agency were looking to sell to. We looked at the customer journey and then ultimately figured out what topics we would need to bring into our content marketing. From there, I started thinking about how can we make the content creation process a little bit more well-rounded. How can I get more people involved in the process, in the ideation, in the creation, in the production, and in the promotion of this content? So I was kind of already thinking about all these different things. I prefer this Venn diagram, which hopefully some of you have seen, from Ann Rockley. She shared it on the Content Marketing Institute blog. It talks about content strategy through the lens of front versus back of the house. And this, I think, is a little bit more refined version of the one I just showed you. Looking at the back-end strategy, looking at how can we reuse content. So through the experience at iSight, you know, we would look at, okay, what is our goal of our content marketing overall this quarter? What campaigns are we trying to produce? What blogs can build up to lead into a white paper and then a webinar and then a conference talk, and how can all of these components work together nicely? So looking at how to reuse content, looking at how our CMS could be structured to better support those different formats of content, looking at how we can create style guides to make that quality content. And then on the front of the house, looking at how all of those things align with our customer engagement and how our customer needs align with our business needs, and then ultimately how we could enable a team to produce that content and ultimately democratize content. So in the end, we came up with a way to democratize content through team content. A few years later, my slide's still the same, I gave a talk out in Boston called Creating a Culture of Content, because that's ultimately what we did. We had 41 people, I think, on team content within the first year. Out of 60 people, that was pretty impressive. And those people were involved in everything from the ideation to the creation to the production to the promotion of the content, and that was really cool to see. So in this talk, I shared some of the challenges to building that content culture. The first one was that I was wearing a lot of hats, and this is something I know I've talked with a lot of people. I think as a content marketer, you're always wearing a lot of hats. You're responsible for many different campaigns and channels and mediums and basically staying on top of all these different tools. You're learning on the job usually because there's always a new tool that you have to figure out if or how that integrates into your process. How can people use that tool, and how does that meet a customer need, or is it just not important at all? You're constantly weighing all of these things and learning as you go. And lastly, you're always dealing with constrained resources, whether it's because you have a lack of money for new tools, whether it's a lack of time, which is usually the big thing, because as we democratize the content creation, everyone comes back and says, you know what, I don't have time to do this week. It goes to the end of the month. A very, very close follow-up to that is buy-in. No one has time for marketing, especially the product managers, the designers, the developers, also known as your subject matter experts. So how do you get those people bought into the idea of content marketing? These are kind of my 4 key lessons, I think. Number 1 was collaborate with people across the different teams, across the different groups, get their feedback throughout the process. The second one is use systems that people are already using. The third, get creative with those systems. They're not going to be automatically tailored to your content marketing needs, of course, so figure out how to make them work. And lastly, track and share your results. It seems obvious, but the only way to get people's attention and keep their energy around something is to share the results as you go. So to dig a little bit deeper into those, collaborate with everyone. See, my slides have gotten more colorful at least, so. Everyone's got a specialty and some talent to bring to the table. There were developers who had majors in English literature, whatever it was, and they had this secret need to just be editing copy, but of course they're not doing that in their day job, they're coding. But having conversations with everyone throughout the process helped me uncover those little talents that people could bring to team content. So we had people across the board involved in the whole process, which was really important. Secondly, we worked with what we had. I learned pretty early on that as an agency, if it's not in Jira, it does not exist. It is not happening. So everything went in Jira. Again, I worked with our developers to develop a custom workflow in Jira so that it worked with everyone, and it was super easy for them to get involved and stay on board and just kind of do it almost as second nature after a point. I got pretty hacky with Google Docs. I think you have to. It's just super accessible. It doesn't require people to create a new account anywhere or learn a new skill. And lastly, WordPress and Drupal were our CMS of choice at the time, and they were just easy enough to use, but again, I was collaborating constantly with our developers to make sure that things were aligned with our needs and the most efficient way to get things together. I got pretty scrappy also, because when you're growing a team, not everyone, as I said, has the time. And frankly, it requires a lot of hand-holding. I did tons of ghostwriting. I did help a number of people figure out the best way to craft an outline, the best way to take that outline and produce some content, whether it was a video or a podcast or whatever it was. So just be willing to do the heavy lifting. And lastly, track and share insights, because team content was very much like a startup. This is from Silicon Valley. If you guys haven't seen it, it's amazing. It was very much like a startup. You had to constantly keep morale high, keep everyone's energy around what you're doing, make sure to share the highlights, the bright spots, whatever you want to call it. Share what's working so that people can replicate it and share it with other teammates and just keep traction. But hold the phone. So I had to use this because I feel like Paul Rudd is like ageless. So I wanted to share a piece of timeless wisdom with you. So moving from content marketing into content strategy was an interesting pivot to make for me. I moved to an agency called Copious, which works with commerce brands. So brands like Yakima, we redesigned their website, so it's really bright shot of their site. But when I made the pivot to looking at commerce and figuring out how to bring content strategy into our work at Copious, there were a number of other factors to consider. We weren't just talking about the CMS anymore. We were talking about the CMS plus the product management system plus whatever shopping cart system they were using. The workflow just got infinitely more complex, and also throw a couple $1 million in there too. Just, you know, no pressure. So as far as approach to content strategy, my perspective started to shift a little bit more from the editorial and the planning side now up into the technical side. So I had to start thinking about information architecture and how that played into the process of things. So as I made the transition from content marketing and content marketing strategy into content strategy and developing an offering around that, as an agency, I started looking at more Venn diagrams. So this one calls out the difference between content marketing versus content strategy, which I think everyone's trying to do. There are 100 million Venn diagrams like this. The content marketing side of things, you're definitely looking more externally, looking at the customer need. The content strategy side, you're looking internally. What is your structure? What are your systems? How are you keeping things running? But ultimately, the space right in the middle is what I want to talk about, because that's what I had to focus on. So the content strategy building blocks that I took away from this, in that Venn diagram, they called it long-term planning. For me, and my perspective, I saw that as how do we build a framework that is scalable? In that Venn diagram also it said alignment with business goals. For me, I think that comes down to aligned teams. Requiring buy-in, it's a given. How do you get there? I think that the easiest way to do that is making sure people are very clear on what the workflow is and where you fit into the picture and into their process that they're already used to. The last one in there was content, which why is that there? Of course content's there, right? So yes, content. So I reorganized it a little bit, but I want to talk about kind of these three building blocks. So alignment, workflow, and framework to ultimately create a case for content strategy. I realized that the challenges for selling content strategy were also eerily similar to the challenges with selling content marketing. I was wearing many hats. I was tasked with the content marketing for the agency while I was also developing this new offering for clients. So trying to juggle that, learning on the job, I took all of the content strategy things that I knew, took my content marketing expertise, and had to also keep learning how commerce was different than other content strategy situations that I'd seen in the past. I was also dealing with constrained resources because frankly I had none. No one really understood where I was, let alone wanted to help me. So I was kind of the content strategy team of one. And of course getting buy-in was a big part of that. So I started with figuring out how to align everyone around what I was trying to sell them. So I started by trying to understand what the existing experience was that our clients had with Copious. As I said, we were an agency working with brands, but I think this also applies if you're a brand. Understanding the experience that customers have with your brand helps you see where the different interactions are within your team and where content can enrich the experience that you're having with your customers. This was an example, little snippet of a customer journey map that we did with a brand. Ultimately, we looked at where the opportunities were to reduce friction or to enrich the experience. When I looked internally at the Copious journey map, which was extremely meta to do, but I looked at that and I tried to understand what the interactions were between strategy, design, and engineering, and where those trade-offs were happening, where things were falling short, where things were falling through the cracks, and where I could fit in. I also had a lot of conversations with people to understand what that experience looked like, mostly internally. And the thing that I kept hearing was pain and frustration and stories of deadlines being missed and content getting lost and clients being frustrated too and losing money, which is never good. Ultimately, what this boils down to is things could be better. I think alignment starts when everyone across the board can agree on one thing, and that is that things could be better, so they're that much closer to already agreeing with whatever you tell them. So, step one, collaborate with everyone. Again, like I said, very similar to the content marketing situation and trying to build a case for that. I talked to people across our strategy, our design, and our engineering team to understand their pain points, as well as the pain points that they were hearing from our clients. Piece two, then, was the workflow, and really examining what those opportunities were for me to fit into our process. So I honed in on what was happening at each stage of our customer journey and looked at where I could fit. I mostly started this by mentally shopping all of the content strategy deliverables, tactics, tools, and things that I knew and that could be applied to make content be more efficiently used for our clients. So I identified opportunities to insert myself into the process. My starter kit, so to speak, was essentially this. I talked about a message hierarchy. How could our clients start to refine their goals, their communication goals, that would influence the content that was on their website, whatever visual design we were putting together for them, whatever product decisions they were making down the line? How could they prioritize what they wanted to communicate about their brand? So I figured I could bring that to the table. A content inventory and an audit is priceless. I think that any brand should have one. Actually, really quickly, going back to the message hierarchy, I had a great conversation with Marsha right here that is on the Content Marketing Institute blog, and there's a little quote in there about how I see the message hierarchy as kind of the North Star for a brand, because I think it's the one thing that everyone can kind of rally around, whether you're an agency or a brand. I think having that focus around what you want to say about your brand is really important. So that was one thing. The content inventory and audit was another, so that we could understand what the overall scope of the content was that we were starting with when we were redesigning a client site, as well as what the nitty-gritty product details were. Depending what product it was, they may have anywhere from 5 to 35 different product attributes, and knowing what that scope was and what the importance of all those pieces of information was really important. I also was involved in the sitemap and the information architecture component of things. So if we were redesigning a client website, I was helping our designers before they even put together a single wireframe to understand what information needed to go where based on stuff that we found in the information, in the content inventory, and the message hierarchy, so that all of the information was real and they weren't designing just based on, whatever looked good. I was also putting together something called the content brief, which talked about all of the different components that would go on each of those pages in the sitemap, so that our clients weren't surprised at the end of the day and we knew what we were starting with for our wireframes. I was also highly involved in the wireframing process so that they were as refined as possible by the time the client got to see them. It saved us time, it saved our clients money, everyone was a little bit happier in the end because we were all on the same page. And lastly, I put together this thing called the Content Production Tracker. There are tons of tools out there that can help you do this and help you manage the workflow of creating your content and getting it into your CMS or whatever it is that you're using. I did it in Google Spreadsheets because our clients were so different, vastly different. I mean, depending what their products were, again, it was very hard to align what was happening in a wireframe to what was happening in content production. But ultimately what this did was help our clients to keep everything really dialed in, make sure that they were creating content in tandem with the design that was happening and in tandem with the development that was happening, so that we kept their projects on deadline and on time. So in order to do that, I had to work with what we had. Again, another lesson from the content marketing piece of things. Working at an agency, a lot of times you're working with teams that are very design first. So we were working with Azure and Lucidchart and InVision and Sketch and all of these really awesome design tools. But in my opinion, content doesn't need to be there. The conversations about content don't need to happen there. So I had to draw lines around what was happening and put a stake in the ground to say, okay, this conversation needs to happen in a Google Doc or in Jira or somewhere else that we are tracking it and we're a little bit more proactive about making sure these things are aligned. And at the end of the day, it let the designers focus on designing and the developers focus on developing. And our team was happier and our clients were happier. So step 2.5 was to collaborate some more. Once I had this kind of loose concept and a workflow design in my mind, I went back to our leadership team and made sure that they were on the same page with me so that our strategists and our designers and our engineers agreed with what I was saying and understood the value of all of these different pieces and saw that there was value not just for us, but also for our clients and ultimately their customers too. After that discussion, we figured out how to form a pilot. This is from the pilot of Friends, because Rachel came in like a crazy person, and no one thought she was going to make it through, after the pilot, but she stuck around because people saw something in her. So I formed a pilot, and this pilot was based on 2 different things. One, I call a 360 value view, essentially, focusing on the internal value and the external value. So I talked through a lot of these as I was going through the starter kit. But at the end of the day, the value of the content strategy services we were offering provided value to us as an agency because it shortened our process greatly because we were much more aligned with our clients off the bat. For our clients, it saved them money, and that's always a good thing. And it just improved our relationships so much more because they knew that they could trust us, that we were delivering them designs that were based on something, not just, here's a block that you should fill with words. And secondly, the journey map was a very important piece of communicating the value and my position in our process. I shared this actual piece, obviously it was a little bit bigger, but I shared our journey map with everyone in the agency so that they understand content strategy is not just a little dot where you want copy to happen. Like, it's not just copywriting. I'm all those little blue stars and then more stars after that. I'm involved in the whole process from the minute we start the client conversation through launch and continue, into governance and keeping things going and optimizing the site. So they understood that I was there the whole time. So once we got the workflow kind of nailed down and got the pilot running, I started to look at how to make this a framework. How do we make this a scalable thing? How do we make it so that if a client comes to us and they're not at the beginning of the process and we're not doing a full site redesign, what if they're just at the very end? What if we're just tinkering, behind the scenes and rebuilding but not redesigning? How do I insert myself there? So for me, what I boiled down the framework to was figuring out where things could be templatized. So the content inventory was a big piece of this because, as I mentioned, different products will have tons of different attributes. So that was an area that I constantly had to tweak and turn dials and collaborate really closely with clients. I was basically a content project manager and trying to understand what their product was, help them understand what their product was, help them understand a priority around their different product attributes and their brand story. Figuring out where there were opportunities to customize. So as I mentioned, the product was a big area that things were customized, but also figuring out how to slice and dice those deliverables so that we could deliver value no matter what size the project. And optimize. I continually talked with our teams and listened to the things that clients were saying about this whole process so that we could make it better the next time. And I tracked and shared results. I think that, as I said before, this is infinitely important in terms of trying to keep the energy going around something and make sure that everyone really understands the value as you go along. I created Confluence pages or just internal spaces that people could drop thoughts throughout the process so that I understood and they understood what value the content offerings were bringing to the overall process. I also paid really close attention to our Google comments, our InVision comments, any conversations that were happening on the periphery, and I took little side notes about them so that I could understand where things were still kind of sticking or a little bit wonky for people and keep improving. And I shared results pretty much weekly. We had a team stand up weekly, and I would share any good client feedback that we had so that the team was kind of constantly hearing what the value was, and we were reiterating what the value was and how things worked. So That's all I got. I feel like I flew through that, but thank you for tolerating my cheesy slides. So I think we can take questions if anyone has any. Yeah.
Were any of the development teams you worked with following agile methodologies? And if they were, how did that affect your development of content strategy?
The question was, were any of the development teams using agile methodology, and how did that affect the content strategy? So, being agency side, we were actually doing all the developing in-house. On the projects that I was on, we had at least one developer in the room throughout the process, especially when I got to the content production tracker. This is the area that involved a lot of customization as well, because I'm not a Magento expert. It's not in my wheelhouse at all. I've seen pieces of it. So having the engineer in the room to have those conversations with me and make sure that I was accounting for everything that was happening in the design and that lined up with everything that was getting built. We were basically pairing on a weekly basis, I'd say. So it was a very fluid process, I would say, agile. Yeah, but does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I was just curious. I mean, it seems like more and more development teams are going agile, so.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think that can present some issues for content developers who's different.
Definitely, yeah. That's why I say I was almost like the content project manager, because it freed up the project manager to do other things with budget and all those good things, but I was really focused on like the nitty-gritty details and making sure that I was the liaison between our client, between our design, and between our development. So just kind of keeping the communication lines constantly open was the big piece of it. Anything else? Yeah.
Will the customer journey diagram be showed?
Will the customer journey diagram be shown?
Is there any way to see
I think
that?
I killed my mic.
Talk about more how that works.
I killed my mic.
Really cool.
I don't know that I should even be sharing that. So maybe it's, yeah, you never saw it. It was all pizza the whole time. Isaac.
Without divulging too much, did you decide that flow was like from left to right? That was how almost all interactions, every client go, as people come in, involved, get disinvolved, or uninvolved, wrap it up? What was that? It was like your average engagement? Is that what it was?
It was our average engagement. I will say that we did journey maps for our clients, almost every project. They weren't always linear. And I mean, you'll notice that there were things that were kind of tangential. There were like little whirlpools off to the side because there are other things that are kind of constantly churning. Yeah, so that was our typical journey map.
And that's what you used to sort of layer the strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. You had a question?
Where do you see content strategy going, like in the next, say, 5 years in a traditional organization?
Where do I see content strategy going in the next 5 years?
I mean, from what you've experienced so far in your flow as your career.
Wow, that's a really hard question. In the next 5 years. Can you give me 5 minutes to think about that? I'm like, wow, I don't even know what I'm doing. Like, it's like, I feel like it's just growing and expanding and scooping up so many more things. And I mean, if this group is any indication, it's grown from like 1,300 to 1,700 in like a year, I feel, or maybe 2 years. I mean, it was 1,300 when I started. So I think that that's indicative of all these different disciplines that are starting to pay attention to content strategy and that are starting to contribute to what we're doing, which ultimately I think will help and hopefully make our work better. But that's not really an answer, but that's
Whatever you say is destined to be because it changes so fast,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I feel like there was a question somewhere. Yeah, yeah.
What advice do you have on getting buy-in from senior management?
Advice for getting buy-in from senior management. So I have always been very lucky. The slide that I took out from the earlier building a culture of content for the content marketing piece, it's a leap of faith. I mean, I feel like at this point, the value of inbound marketing I see is like a given. I don't know. I just think that it's become so omnipresent that brands understand that the more content that they're putting out there, the better content that they're putting out there, the true content that they're putting out there that's valuable to people, it's building their brand, it's making them more trustworthy, it's creating a relationship with new or existing people, customers. From a content marketing side, I think that that is kind of the direction that I am coming from. Getting buy-in for content strategy, though, I mean, I guess I talked mostly about the content strategy side of things. Were you talking more about the content marketing? Oh, the
Strategy part, you know, putting together a strategy, taking time to do that.
As far as getting buy-in for creating the content strategy piece of it, I think it all goes back to that alignment piece, because when I started at Copious, for instance, we were working with like 5 or 6 different clients, and I was hearing the same problems come up over and over again, that content was getting put to the end, that clients were thinking that we were developing the content and we weren't, that whoops, we forgot to develop any content for this entire page or this entire section or this entire product line, or what happens if that product is out of stock and no one thought about it. Like, content is everywhere, and the minute that you start to define what content is to people, pull up a website, any website, and you know what you see there, you're not going to the site for the design, you're going for content, which is images, it's the headers, it's the calls to action, it's the copy, it's virtually everything. And you have to consider how that stuff is getting there. And from our perspective as an agent, or I mean, whether you're an agency or a brand, at the end of the day, your agency is not going to be with you forever. So you have to have a foundation that is communicable to people in your team and whoever joins your team later on, and whatever agency you pick up later on, that's going to help you, you know, create a new system. So having something to last, I guess, is the other piece. Moving between agencies or moving between client brands, have the tools we've used to track success, have they changed, or how have they changed? Between agencies, no. The way that we're using them has changed. With iSight, for example, we had a marketing and optimization team that I was working with really closely to develop reports that were custom and were effective. I guess that was the other key piece I forgot to mention earlier, but we had different reports for sales and different reports for marketing and different reports just for team content people, so that the metrics we were looking at were valuable and people weren't just sitting in a meeting with a bunch of like charts on a screen that didn't mean anything to them. At Copious, another agency that was looking to attract clients and talent, it was much more organic than that. It was basically, you know, see what's happening with traffic and where a conversation is happening. It was a lot more organic. And as far as clients go, the clients that I was working with for Copious were so diverse, and the projects were so diverse. The best metrics that I can really say were more like time saved, and I mean, that translates to money saved, but I wasn't really looking at like traffic and that sort of thing for them at that point. I was giving them a governance plan to say, here's what you could do to maybe improve on this page or this section based on stuff that we talked about but maybe didn't get to. But yeah, we hadn't really gotten into the metric side of things. But yeah.
But when you're creating team content, you were getting a lot more people in the organization involved in creating or some part of the content creation management process. How did you do that in the sense of generating enthusiasm and also sort of countering the, oh, that's not my job, I'm just a programmer or whatever, that's somebody else's job to worry about content?
How did I get people to care about joining team content in the first place? People that were like, it's not my job. I totally forgot to mention this, but there was pizza. That was like, honestly, that was step one. That's why there's pizza. So it's important. Food gets people in a room. Then, I mean, food also gets people a little bit more warmed up and open to whatever you're going to tell them. As an agency, it was kind of easy to convince people because the minute you tell a designer, can you talk more about the cool stuff you did for that one project? If you ever want to do a project like that again, I mean, it's kind of common sense. Like, give us more, we'll get more. So I think that that was a pretty easy connection for people to make. Yeah, that was kind of the biggest piece, I think. Yeah. Did one of you had a question, I feel like. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I guess, so with different types of businesses, like say a product-led business and a services-led business, would selling content strategy, would your strategy for selling content strategy change between the two? And
No, I don't think so. I mean, because the question was between selling a product versus selling a service, would my strategy for selling a content strategy still work? And I would say, yeah, it would still translate. I mentioned that Copious worked with commerce clients. We did work with a B2B to C client that the product was a service. I would say even especially for them, it was easy to make the case because it's a much more expensive thing that they're selling. It's a much more involved process. It's exponentially more important that the content that's on the site is appropriate, is informative, is the right level of depth, and that, you know, their ultimate goal of their site was to create more qualified leads for their sales team. So I leveraged the message hierarchy quite often with them to make sure that what was happening on their site wasn't getting blown out of proportion, and they were, you know, keeping their message focused, because they could write for days. They were just sending me back like pages and pages and pages and pages of content, and I was like, okay, you said that you only wanted to, not only, but you wanted to focus most on these 3 things. Let's go back to that. Let's evaluate basically on a sentence by sentence pattern to like make sure that everything was really as efficient as it could be, as refined as it could be. So that was a piece. I think that they saw it the more I kept inserting myself in the conversation. So again, it's a matter of trust too, I think. But yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
So you talked about tracking and sharing goals as a way to keep people engaged and motivated. Like, what kind of metrics would you use to do that?
What kind of metrics were we promoting and sharing and tracking to keep people engaged? For team content, it started pretty superficial, like what was the traffic looking like on a certain post, how much were people, you know, staying on that post to read all the way through it, how much was a piece of content driving someone deeper into the site, and how many shares, because early on it was pretty much all about building our presence in social, you know, just getting the agency out there in front of people so that they associated all of these different areas that we were leading in with us. So, yeah.
Sort of like a cross between analytics, like with Google Analytics.
Yeah, it was all Google Analytics, and then also, I mean, I was always listening on social, so yeah. A little bit of a guerrilla approach to social analytics, but yeah. Yeah. It's a good question. I didn't talk about at all. How do SEO and SEM play into content strategy? For me, actually, I typically would roll that stuff into the content brief stage of things. Also in defining the sitemap. I mean, it should be involved. It should be a consideration, I think, way early in the process when you're figuring out like the priority of information on pages.
Part of that, because it's part of the piece of the puzzle.
It is, yeah, yeah. I'd say it's a piece of the puzzle in site mapping in terms of figuring out like how much of what sort of information you want where to align with whatever your goals are in the SEO and SEM realm. And then I usually will drop it into the content brief part too, so that down the line, if someone is rewriting a page or rewriting a section of a site, they know what our goals are. Also, I would say that that should be involved in the governance plan because your goals are not going to be the same year over year, hopefully. So it should be revisited and loop those people into the conversation.
That's an affirmation.
Yay, good.
Do you feel have you made compromises because of search engine marketing or SEO? I mean, wherever those goals are out in the company, it's like you need to, based on keywords, if people are imposing keywords, keyword strategies in place.
Made compromises in what? Oh, you know what? I don't typically do the copywriting, so that's kind of on the client side of things. But I'm sure they do. And I was looking at a lot of the copy though that was coming into the content tracker documents, and people still have like in the back of their mind the tendency to keyword stuff pages, so I was kind of gently nudging them away from that or editing things out where it was getting a little too crazy. So yeah, it's good to keep an eye on. Yeah. Anyone else? Cool. Well, thank you all for really awesome questions too. Thank you. Okay.